Mr. Johnson, now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you. Professor Turley, I unfortunately agree with you that courts are very reluctant to question the president's honesty or any president's honesty or motivations and go behind his determinations. But I think that on this one, at least as to the use of military funds, he wants to move military funds to have the border guarded by building a wall with military funds. Presumably the wall is a military asset for military use. But the Posse Comitatus Act specifically says the military cannot be used to enforce domestic law. So how can you justify the use of military funds for a military purpose that is denied to be a military purpose by law?
No, that's an excellent question, and that will be an issue the court will have to deal with. I have to say that I'm skeptical.
Because?
Because the military has been used on the border in the past. Presidents have called the military to the border. It's a classic use of the military.
Have they been challenged in court?
Not that I recall, but I doubt a court's going to seriously debate whether a president has the authority to send the military to the border. Your point, Mr. Chairman, is a perfectly good one. To the extent that they're doing law enforcement duties, that does bring up posse comitatus. That is a legitimate
immigration law is law enforcement duties.
But the
drug smuggling is law. What would they be doing that wouldn't be law enforcement duties?
Well, because the border is also a national security border. It is a classic use of the military. They patrol the border. And I'm just saying how I believe a court is going to view this.
But they patrol the border presumably against foreign troops. Insofar as they're talking about drug smuggling or illegal immigration, that's domestic law enforcement.
Well, I would say the border protection is a mix. And the question is, do you expect a federal judge to say, you can't order troops to the border to deal with border security? The answer is...
No, but I expect the federal judge maybe to say you can't order troops to the border to deal with drug smuggling or illegal immigration. National security, if the Mexicans are going to invade, 1848 isn't that long ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I do think that this body can correct this problem. It can create clarity on the use of this.
Mr. Gerson, would you comment?
That doesn't currently exist in the statute.
On which part of it?
On the use of military forces.
Well,
to enforce domestic law, or is that what is happening here?
I agree with you in the abstract, but in the real, I have to agree with you because that's a point that we make in our litigation, and I expect it to be accepted. I think what to me is the right answer to that comes from the fact that sure, the president can dispatch troops to the border for a reason that is consistent with presidential war powers. There needs to be an underlying fact. If it's just a question of interdicting immigrants, that doesn't relate to the enumerated power that the president has.
So the express purpose of the wall, which is to interdict immigrants and prevent smuggling, would not be a military purpose within the meaning of the Posse Comitatus?
Well, again, I'm on the public record in our filing saying that, and I happen to agree with it, but I'm not free to say anything else either. You know, as to other issues, can this be vindicated? Of course it can. I'm not burdened by. I'm not commenting on anybody else's lawsuit, but I'm not burdened by the problems that congressional standing raises.
Okay, let me ask one other question. Well, I agree with you on congressional standing, and I'm glad of that. In fact, it gets to a different question, which is probably a little off topic, but I'll mention it here anyway. The Justice Department maintains, as a matter of law, that no president can be indicted, as a matter of law. Okay. Justice Department maintains a lot of positions that one might contest and think they're wrong. Normally, however, one contests it in court. If the Justice Department thinks it can indict you for something or other, it indicts you. You move to dismiss on the grounds that it's whatever the grounds are, and the court will decide. But if the Justice Department decides it cannot indict a president as a matter of law, then it won't do so. And how does a court ever decide, how do you ever get the court to decide whether the Justice Department is right or not? It seems to me there's a catch-22 there, but
Well,
I digress. Go ahead.
I'm quite familiar with that provision. It was written with respect to the potential indictment, not of a president, but the vice president.
Right.
And it wasn't tested. It served.
My point is it cannot be tested.
I think you're probably right. I think that there is a range of non-justiciable disputes that will never be tested. There are some that relate to war powers that will,
Okay,
that
let
will,
me ask one
that will
last,
never be tested.
Let me ask one last question, because that's a different topic. What would you think of a statute, and Ms. Goitine recommended a version of this, that said any presidential declaration of emergency automatically ends in 10 days or 30 days if Congress hasn't affirmatively acted to extend it or to ratify it?
Well, it's impracticable. And I think that my fundamental look at that is not so much philosophical. I mean, how quickly can you obtain meaningful action, and what happens? Put aside dealing with issues of border security that have gone on for years that you can debate forever and come up with conclusions. What if we were under attack of some kind, say a cyber attack that hit us on many fronts?
Well, the president could declare the emergency, could act on the emergency. Congress, within 10 days or 30 days, could decide to extend it or not. Congress could easily act in that time.
Again, I go back to something I said earlier. You can extend it forever, but when you get to what the fundamental congressional power is, it's the power of the purse. And so what you're going to do is something that relates to the power that you actually have. If you disapprove what the president is doing, you're going to take steps to cut off his ability to do it, or her ability to do it.
Either you act either you automatically cut off the declaration of emergency if Congress doesn't declare it in a certain period of time. To act on the power of the purse requires a 2/3 vote to overcome the president's veto of your prohibition on his use of money, and that's shifting the burden.
Yeah, I don't say that you're not going to have a practical and constitutional difficulty if you do what you're going to do. But I think let me just say this. I think that with clearer definitions as to what constitutes an emergency, you're going to be on much better grounds, not only judicially but politically.
Clearer definitions are certainly in order, but without a time limit within which Congress has to, which was originally the intent in 1976, but without restoration in some version of that, it seems to me to say that Congress, to stop the appropriation of money, needs a 2/3 vote is turning Article 1 on its head.
Well, what happens, it's not my job to ask you the questions, but yours to ask me, but I mean, as you war game this in committee, what is it that you think happens after the expiration of 10 days or 30 days?
Whatever authorities the president was granted in the by the emergency declaration cease.
And what if the president doesn't do what you want?
Well, that's always the question. Hopefully you get an
but again, I think the time limit issue is somewhat artificial. That it may be helpful to have a time limit. You ought to consider that. But what happens at the end of it? I think you need to think. I think you need to think that through.
Thank you very much. My time is very much expired.